What I'd like to do tonight is take you through the elements of theology. But obviously, that's too great a task. So I narrowed it down, and I'd like to show you how to get into Proclus's elements of theology, how to get into it. And therefore, strictly speaking, it's not a lecture, which is to persuade, but a demonstration. So I'm going to take an example, and I'm going to try to open it up, and through that, I hope it will then be an avenue for you to travel into this curious world of Proclus. Now, one word. The elements of theology. Theology doesn't mean God as God. It really means a study of the divine. It includes references to God, but essentially it's the elements of and the study of theology, the study of the divine by identifying its elements. So this is the way I would like to bring you into it. First, the most fundamental element in all Proclus's elements of theology and Neoplatonic thought is analogy. Now, it all comes from and goes back to Plato's Timaeus. And the most beautiful of bonds is that which most perfectly unites into one both itself and the things which it binds together, and to effect this in the most beautiful manner is the natural property of analogy. Now, we have to show that by the study of analogy, this is not rhetoric, but this is most accurate and precise language. So we have to show that there's a natural intrinsic bond to analogy. It perfectly unites into one, so it's a way of unifying both itself and the things which it relates. All right. It binds it all together, and that's the natural property of analogy. With one major word, somehow we have to show that intrinsic to analogy is beauty. Now, if we can do all that, all right, that'll be a stepping stone into Proclus. All right, now how are we going to do it? First, I'd like to make a very straightforward, simple intro to analogy. There are two laws of transformation: switching terms within a ratio and between the ratios. Now, the ratio is any two things that are related. A is to B. That's a ratio. I can represent that with just two dots. So A is to B is equal. We can equally change that to B is to A. Now look here. As C is to D. Well, look here. This is a ratio. This is a ratio. Therefore, we can switch the terms within the ratio, switch them around, and we have a new form of the original analogy. Second, we can connecting the terms between the ratios, but keeping the order of the relation constant. What does that mean? All right? That means we can now connect terms between ratios. If I take the first here, I take the first here. If I take the second here, I take the second in the second ratio. So therefore I've generated another one. A is to C, right, as B is to D. All right. Now, what's the two rules? You switch the terms within the ratio. That's within the ratio. Or you connect them between the ratios. So long as you follow the rule, that you must keep the order of the relations constant. So whatever you do in one, you must do in the other. In other words, we can equally say D is to B, if that's the order we're taking it in, then C is to A. Whatever order we start with, we must duplicate in the second ratio. Now, this is a four-term analogy. We could put it classically as the shepherd is to sheep as the ruler is to his subjects, or we could put it with numbers and say 2 is to 4 as 3 is to 6, because analogies can use three terms. It can use symbols, A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z. Numbers, 2 is to 4 as 3 is to 6. Ideas, shepherd is to sheep as ruler is to his subjects. Now that's a four-term analogy. Now what we did last week was study the Republic. And the whole Republic, the task of the dialectic, is nothing other than taking these four terms and placing in them the ideas, knowledge, understanding, belief, image thinking. And what does he tell us to do? Show all the ways in which you can relate the terms. Well, that's formally 8 ways. You can relate them 8 ways. These are 3. If you follow these 2 rules, you can see you can generate 8 transformations of a 4-term analogy. Now, we are going to spend our time for a while on the 3-term analogy because that's essential to Proclus's theology. Now, notice this is 4 terms here. Now I'm going to change it. Same rules of transformation. Same rules. 3 terms. A, B, C. Therefore, we can say A is to B as B is to C. 3 terms. Now, this is called the mean analogy because these terms are called the extremes. These are called the means. Therefore, this is called the 3-term analogy. It's also called a mean analogy. Following these, we'll show the 4 transformations that a mean analogy can take. All right? We'll represent it. A is to B as B is to C. What's our first rule? Switch the terms. B is to A. Switch the terms. C is to B. Now look here. If we take these terms alternately, A is to B as B is to C, we'll have the same one we started with, and therefore it's not transformed. Therefore we have to do it with this one. Therefore, taking the terms alternately, B is to C as A is to B. What do we do now? We can switch the terms following rule number 1. Therefore, C is to B as B is to A. Those are the only valid transformations of a 3-term analogy. So what? Well, watch what happens now. Remember what problem we're working on. Whether or not we can see that the very form of analogy contains within it, intrinsically, the property of beauty. That was our task, was it not? Well,